too big. And then you start to drop to reload. The camera's gonna pan over right on that pan where your gun is right here. Boom. I always saw the scenes in my head, but just in terms of what stock we're gonna use, what lens are we gonna use for this. Alex. I knew what I wanted the film to look like or what I wanted it to feel like, more importantly. And just in terms of the visual style, Alex Nepomniaschy, who was my director of photography, had done a film a number of years ago called Safe that he shot for Todd Haynes. And Safe had a real wonderful, deliberate formality to everything. You know, very cold and very austere and without a whole lot of emotion or feeling. And yet it was inhabited by characters that you did care about and that you did identify with. So I thought that was a great, for Narc, that was very apropos, that style and that approach.
Because the story takes place in the winter in Detroit, I thought that the exterior should be done in cold tones, having bluish tone to them.
And you oppose that with this wonderful, warm, kind of glowing atmosphere within his home, you know, this sense of kind of home and hearth, and everything here is warm and everything here is inviting and safe. And as it progresses, it gets less and less so. It becomes less and less warm. It starts to mirror his life on the outside. So we slowly began to drain the color out of his home life and make it look more like the rest of that world, which was the one he was choosing, his professional pursuits over family life. Wait, because they're not all the way around. You can't see him. And then boom. Anytime we did try to put the camera on a dolly or do something more elaborate, it just fell apart. It blew up in our face. And so handheld not only became the stylistic choice and the aesthetic choice, it also became pragmatic. And it became a necessity because we didn't have time to mess around. We had to go. But it worked beautifully. And I'm proud of that. And I have a preference for handheld stuff because I think you just feel yourself more a part of the action. It took us a while to find a tunnel that I thought was right for that opening shot. You know, the reveal of, here's the tunnel. And the way we approached it was, I knew that I was gonna cross-cut that material with Tellis, Jason Patrick's character, reading over the case history and reading the incident account and what happened to Cal Vess, So he doesn't know anything really about Cal Vess. He doesn't know anything about his assailants other than there may be two guys. He knows it happened in a tunnel, but he's not really sure. So everything is it's very nebulous when you see that shot. What is in focus, however, is the rain, because he knows what rain looks like. So what Alex and I decided to do was to play the rain in focus and everything beyond that out of focus. So you have to look through and it becomes very murky and it becomes very hard to discern this person from that person. And that was a very deliberate approach. And even when we're in the tunnel and you've got stuff now in the foreground, you've got action in the foreground, we chose to keep the rain in focus still. So now the rain in the background is in focus, but the foreground is completely out of focus. So that was a conscious decision that we made and a stylistic one to stick to that, just that kind of idea, or that notion that this guy really doesn't know what happened. And that sequence was shot on reversal stock, which is an older film stock, which they used a lot in the 60s to shoot newsreel footage. What we did with it was we shot it and then it was cross-processed as negative film. So what happens is it creates this almost surreal kind of quality where the colors look, there's a vibrancy, but there's this weird dulling of everything too, and it really did wonders for me in just delineating one from the other. Now you're seeing an event depicted in the past, now you're seeing the present, And we wanted to keep that, fairly consistent. And the one time we indulged anything other than that was when Ray Liotta's character, Oak, is giving his account of what happened in that tunnel, and that's the one time I just decided to make the film black and white, because for a guy like that, there's no gray area to explore, It's his truth and his account, and therefore it's black and white. They killed him, period, end of story. Alex and I, again, made a decision to portray Oak's character always with obstructions near him or behind him or around him. And when he's having the argument with Jason's character outside of the widow Calves's home, behind Ray, this kind of great snarl of trees and barbed wire and broken signs, and it's just a mess behind him. And behind Jason is nothing. It's clean, it's empty.
Great.
And again, it's these things you do to suggest a psychological framework for this particular character. So, and the same thing could be said of the scene in the car when Oak is talking about his wife. I wanted to put obstructions over him so that you'd have to look through all that stuff, this kind of collage of, you know, branches and light and shadow and all this stuff that you're having to look through. Whereas Jason there are no obstructions over his face. He's just watching, because he doesn't have the psychological torment. He doesn't have any of these things, and therefore I didn't want to depict him that way. He's clean. In terms of the shot of the mirror, I think at that point, there's two things that go on in that particular sequence. And the first is that she remains out of focus until he douses his face with water and rubs his eyes. And as he rubs his eyes, now she's in focus. But she remains in that mirror, and he never makes direct eye contact with her. Because at that point, and it's, you know, it's pretentious to say to some extent because it's just a directorial. You do it because you do it and it makes sense to you. But at that point, she's really not there. It's a reflection of their life together. That's why the one moment I did give her is when she crosses over to give him that kiss on the head goodbye, and that's it. There's a real finality to that sequence. But I didn't want him to acknowledge her, because by acknowledging her, he would admit somehow that she still held that allure for him in terms of family life and this relationship with her. So he can't really acknowledge her in that way, and he's past that. He's not thinking about that. He's obsessed with, to some extent, this kid, this guy. Why couldn't I catch the guys that did this to him?
I want to thank you, Catherine, for letting me come by.
Oh, it's not a problem.
The scene with Tellison, Calves's widow, I wanted to create this very formal, kind of structured, kind of colorless sequence in which everything was very subjective. And once Tellis's character starts asking difficult questions, and it turns to the question of character and her deceased husband, the entire scene flips, and literally flips, because it jumps over the axis, and now you're looking back at them. And now the shots are very hard profile, and it's very adversarial at that point. They're really kind of going at one another in a very subtle way. It's not really a challenge in as much as it's one character trying to suss out what does she know, what does she not know, and it's another character, the widow, trying to preserve the memory of her husband. And I thought, again, cinematically, visually, we need to convey that, and we need to do it, and again, in a way that's not going to draw attention to itself. It just becomes, okay, now we're going to show you this from a different angle, because the entire dynamic of this conversation has just shifted. I think that the way we approached the editing was based solely on character and based solely on story. How are we going to tell this story effectively? What will this necessitate us doing in terms of the editorial approach? When Ray and Jason's characters go into the apartment, we used a series of jump cuts and literally eliminated all the pauses between the action to give them a sense of you're in there and you have to deal with that. And again, it's like being kind of, hit with cold water. It's like, whoa, that's how fast it goes off.
This movie had a very interesting and challenging style for a film editor. And so in that regard, it was great for me. I mean, I really got the chance to do things that I would never be able to do, on another film.
The opening scene is obviously very rambunctious and very high energy and very violent and very immediate. It really was about propulsion. It was about go, 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 and kind of pedal to the metal stuff.
Well, Joe, we got the dailies, and I think Joe was worried because, I think they'd wanted to do it with more coverage. There's some things that he wanted to do that, quite frankly, they didn't have the time to do. And I remember he called me, he was like, how does it look? And as you see in the movie, I mean, it's not a lot of cutting that has to be done with that scene. There's a few invisible cuts.
And there's a moment when Jason's character reaches a brick wall and goes up it, that we did a series of 3 dissolves. And it was really just to give him speed over that wall, because he couldn't get over that in the amount of time we needed him to get over it in.
There was no sound. They shot it all MOS, and then we had Jason running around on a track field later on, to do his breaths and things. And we put it together, and it just, it really was heart-pounding.
I wanted to show the progression of an investigation without doing the standard door-to-door, scene-to-scene. You know, the way that lays out, I just thought was boring and hackneyed. It had been done, you know, thousands of times. So we created this sequence, this quad screen sequence, split screen, where you're literally following the name Jimi Fredericks around the screen, and they're going from place to place. And what it's doing is it's showing the investment of time and the progression of the case, and them following leads and chasing this and chasing that. And you're doing it, I think, in a very economical way. And you're doing what would normally take, you know, 8 to 9 minutes in about 2 minutes.
I mean, I don't think it's a device you can just pull out of your bag and say, let's just make this a split screen. I think it really has to be a special, you know, scene in a special movie that'll hold that up.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it'd be perfect.
If it's that good and it's sourced and it feels like it's coming out of that room, I may leave it. I don't like to rely too much on music in the early stage. It's good to temp music into certain things, but I think the scene has to work with nothing there before it can be adorned with any kind of you know, score, any kind of musical piece to accentuate it. It has to really work on its own with no additional elements to it, musical elements.
It should not be me helping him out. Gotcha.
We knew we didn't want to hit it over the head with music. Brian Ross, our music supervisor, put us in touch with Cliff, and we were both huge fans of Cliff, and, you know, he's Steve Soderbergh's guy, you know, on most pictures, and we met him and felt like he was sort of the right choice.
Cliff, just on a whole, his music was really helped us a great deal because it gave us this kind of emotional element that we didn't really realize was there.
Cliff had a really interesting sort of angle on what he did. He used a lot of material from like junkyards and things, like metal, and, you know, he'd get big, you know, aircraft, you know, sheet metal, and he had all this stuff hanging in his house, and he'd hit it and bang it and treat it, and you know, a lot of the sounds you hear are really treated, you know, banging of junk. I mean, it's amazing. He's really an amazing guy, but it all really worked for the film.
I can say that I'm incredibly proud, and I think I got a chance to work with some amazing people and some people that their talent made this film that much better. And their support and their contributions made all the difference, I think, you know, and made sure that, at least in the final analysis, we made something that shook it up for a little bit, you know, and if it doesn't hang around and people don't remember Narc in 20 years, that's okay with me, because it's about living in the moment. This moment right now is pretty great.